It's a great honor to be here for a lecture in memory of Bela Mashinsky, who was survivor of Oshmiani and Vilna ghettos, and also the Kaiserwald, Stuttgart, and Magdeburg concentration camps. After liberation, Bela worked for Hayas, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, bringing other survivors to the United States, and she and her family immigrated in 1946. In later years, she was a survivor volunteer at the Holocaust Memorial Museum, where I was able to meet her on a few occasions, and where I had the privilege of working for 26 years. Meeting survivors such as Bela and being inspired by their heroism, resilience, and compassion was by far the highlight of my time at the Holocaust Museum. And through my work in collections, collecting new artifacts, and cataloging them, I learned many inspiring, moving aspects to Holocaust history that had previously been unknown to history books. It is uncovering a new chapter. At a time when far too many people denied the reality of the Holocaust, its authentic documentation from the time that provide irrefutable proof of what happened. And today I'll be discussing one such artifact with you. The timing of today's lecture is appropriate for another reason. Just last weekend marked the 85th anniversary of the Munich Conference, where the world stood by and even applauded the dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. And in a few weeks, we'll be commemorating the 85th anniversary of Kristallnacht, which was the first mass act of violence. There were smaller acts of violence. It was the first mass act of violence against Germany's Jewish community, which led to hundreds of deaths, destruction of thousands of Jewish-owned businesses and synagogues, and the roundup of over 30,000 Jewish men who were sent to concentration camps. And these two events, the Munich Conference and Kristallnacht, happened prior to the start of World War II, but they set the stage for the later implementation of the final solution and the murder of 6 million Jews. People often used to ask me, how did the Holocaust Museum collect new artifacts? And the answer is there was no one answer. Sometimes we worked with the potential donors for years before they said, yes, I'm ready to part with my artifacts and find a good home for them. And other times, things just sort of dropped in our lap. Somebody came by and said, I've got this thing, do you want it? And yeah, sure. But every member of the museum's community was a potential source of new acquisitions. And I want to share one acquisition with you today. And the source was a little different than usual. I came to know two very energetic high school teachers who were museum fellows. And as part of this fellowship program, they got to listen to the testimony of survivors. One teacher was film teacher, and the other was a history teacher. To point out, they lived in Pennsylvania, in an area with very, very few Jews. This was just a small but very good high school in central Pennsylvania. And they were so captivated by the testimony of this one survivor, Frank Grunwald, that together they worked with their students and put together a documentary called Misha's Fugue, based on his life. And this amazing film went on to win several Telly Awards, including Art Direction, Historical Biography, and Silver for the People's Choice. The students produced it. They wrote an original film score. They did the original illustrations and graphics for the film. It was incredible. And they sent me the finished product when it was done. And I'm listening to it and saying, this is all really, really nice. And then my jaw dropped at the end of the film. Then they showed an artifact, the likes of which I had never seen before. And at this point, I had been working with the museum's collection for almost 20 years. And what was unusual about this collection is it's the first time I had ever seen original documentation, or authentic as we talk, that says what was going through a woman's mind moments before she was killed. We have testimony of survivors, but it's hard to find this type of testimony from someone who was murdered. This woman who was able to jot down something just as she was entering the gas chamber. And within weeks, I boarded a plane and met with Frank, a teacher's suggestion, and he was delighted to donate this artifact. He said it's one reason why he did the film is he wanted to find a good place where it would be preserved and could be of use to historians and researchers. So, who is Frank? Frank, here he is a baby. František Míša Grunwald. He went during World War II, in the 30s, by his middle name, Míša. Later, František and Frank in the United States. He was the younger son of Dr. Kurt and Vilma Grunwald. He was born on September 30th, 1932, in Czechoslovakia, and grew up in an assimilated Jewish home that considered itself to be Czech and not really Jewish. Their Jewish identity was very much secondary to their identity. Frank had one brother, John, who was 4 years older. His father was an obstetrician and a serious amateur photographer and a musician, and the photographs were all taken by the father. And Vilma, his wife, was also a lover of art and music and dedicated her life to her two sons. The family's life changed dramatically in March of 1939 when Germany invaded Czechoslovakia and immediately instituted anti-Semitic ordinances. On July 13th, 1942, the family was deported to Terezin, also known as Theresienstadt. And these documents that you see on the right are the original deportation orders to Vilma on top and Kurt on the bottom. Here's a picture of Theresienstadt. What is Theresienstadt? It was the Nazis' model ghetto. It was all a Potemkin village. It was like a giant stage set. It was pretty on the outside, but the purpose was to hide the real carpet, the royal conditions, because they knew that at some point the Red Cross would want to come and visit. And so they critified it on the outside so they could say, see, the Jews in Czechoslovakia and Europe are not really suffering. Well, what was the truth behind Theresienstadt? Of 140,000 Jews who were sent there, 19,000 were deported to other camps and killing sites. An additional 33,000 died of starvation, and only 10% of the 15,000 children survived the war. Frank was one of those lucky ones. In the camp, Kurt continued his work as a physician. Vilma worked in a large kitchen. Food was scarce, but the family was able to visit each other in the afternoon, and Frank got some informal education. In his spare time, he pursued his lifelong passion of drawing and art. The Grunwalds remained in Theresienstadt for a year and a half, and then were deported to Auschwitz on December 15, 1943, together with 5,000 other Czech Jews in back-to-back transports. And this document, like the one I showed before, sending them to Theresienstadt, is from the International Tracing Service archive, which the Holocaust Museum obtained a digital copy of about 15 years ago. This archive contains 16 linear miles documentation. 16 linear miles, most made by the Nazis, some made post-war. And this is how we've been able to verify the dates of a lot of the deportations, both to the ghetto and from the ghetto. So here we have it in December 1943. They're deported to Auschwitz. What was going through a child's mind as it entered train? Again, rather than relying on post-war testimony, which might have changed, we always like to go back to original documents. This drawing was from memory book, an autograph book given to another child survivor of terrorism. And you can see that it's a train headed downhill. It says terrorism up here, Birkenau, which was part of Auschwitz, on the bottom. Now, people didn't know about the gas chambers. They hadn't heard the word Auschwitz. They didn't know that Birkenau was part of Auschwitz, but they knew there was something very ominous about these deportations. And in fact, we have some postcards that are written at a slant from Auschwitz to Terezin in the code where the postcard slants downhill. It's a warning that things are not good. Slants uphill, which we don't have any in our collection, then it was things are going to be okay. What does this little scrapbook page say? It says, until the time improves, and I will be home once again, remember me, your friend, Coco Keller. Coco is deported to Auschwitz in October 1944 and murdered at the age of 13. Michael Kraus was another Czech Jewish child who was on the same transport as the Grunwalds. And we have this from a diary. I'd say it's a post-war diary, but he put this together about a year after liberation, so it's really contemporaneous. He had actually started it in Terezin, lost it in Auschwitz, and then composed it after liberation with the illustrations. And here's what Michael Kraus writes about the same transport that the Grunwalds were on. It's the morning, December 13th, 1943, and there's a strange sound throughout the ghetto. The play entered the houses and barracks. Clerks delivered the mails. And really, my foreboding was correct. From our house, Q609, 15 names were on the list, mine among them. The next day, early in the morning, we dragged ourselves to the train. A long line of men, women, children, and old people weighted down with luggage. We crawled to the platform. On one side, ready cattle cars. On the other, huge mounds of luggage. And in front of us, a table with the officials. Several SS men, the leader of the police. A colorful assortment of German murderers. We were checked one by one. Everyone got a number. And with that, we took leave of Terezin. We were helped onto the high platform of the cattle cars, dark without single window. In the corner, there was a pail and demijohn of water. When 50 had entered, the gate was banged shut and sealed, and total darkness enveloped us. The Jews from Terezin were brought to a separate fenced-in section of Auschwitz known as Czech family camp. And it's here on the bottom of the camp, quadrant B2, B, and gas chambers were on the opposite side. And the Czech family camp was different from the rest of Auschwitz. It was like Terezin itself. It was set up in case the Red Cross would come to pay an inspection, which meant that the Jews in the family camp got to fear their own clothing. They kept some of their own personal belongings, including paper and pencil, which we'll see plays an important part. And they were held there in case anybody wanted to come and see what Auschwitz was all about. However, from this photo, you can see it's still a very dismal place. Living conditions were horrible. Food rations were minimal. With nothing else to do, Frank was still a little kid who walked around and he met Dina Guttenbova-Babbitt. Some of you might have heard of her. She was in the newspaper several years ago looking for her original drawing, which Mengele had asked her to do to document for the racial characteristics of Roma, otherwise known as gypsies, in the past. In her oral testimony, she says she only only drew one picture for fun, and that was a picture of Misha, who she took a liking to. He loved art, he saw her drawing, and he'd sit and watch her draw every day. More importantly, Dina introduced him to her boyfriend, Willie Brockman, a Jewish barracks head. Willie hired Frank to run various errands for him and paid him with extra food and clothing to share with his family. Then, in June of 1943, the International Red Cross paid a visit to the cleaned-up, purified Theresienstadt camp and decided everything was fine and they no longer needed to visit Auschwitz, which meant the Germans no longer needed Czech family camp. Soon afterwards, the Nazis concluded they no longer needed the camp, and on July 6, 1944, all the inhabitants went one of the infamous selections. Frank's father was sent to the right with other able-bodied men. Frank's older brother walked with a limp. He had a cup, which was a lethal handicap in the Nazi eyes. It was sent to the left. But what about Vilma? Vilma is athletic, not yet 40 years old. Frank was sure she would have survived. Frank was initially sent to the left with the other small children, but his protector, Willie Brockman, grabbed him by the shoulder, pushed him to the right when the Germans weren't looking, and he survived. He was sent with a group of almost 100 other boys. They were all older, 14 to 16. At 12, Frank was the youngest. And they became known after the war as the Birkenau Boys. And they were used to run messages in the camp and sort belongings. What was going through the children's head? Here's another page from Michael Krause's diary that we referenced earlier. And he talks about seeing his family taken away, be murdered. I didn't know then we would never see each other again. Maybe it was better. Then they selected us, 98 boys. The others were to stay. Leaving father was terrible. I see him in front of me, emaciated, sick. How he cried. He who had always been so good to everybody, and now I left him, leaving him to die. I can't think about it because it's the most horrible moment in my life. On July 11th, I didn't sleep. The night was bright, the sky was red. That, somewhere, I can't talk about it. On July 11th, they killed my father. I balled my fist, I cried, and promised to avenge him. The surviving members of the Czech camp remained in Auschwitz through the summer. Frank managed to see his father once or twice, but his father had changed. He had visibly aged and was much more depressed. And in October, Frank witnessed his father being marched out of the camp to be transferred somewhere else. The Birkenau Boys remained in Auschwitz until January, when they were sent on a death march to Mauthausen and its subcamps Melt and Ginskirchen. Again, a map from Michael Krause's diary. As the war wound down, the boys became increasingly enfeebled. Michael Krause wrote in his diary about spending the last days with Frank, Misha Grunwald. Our hopes for a better camp had vanished. We're awakened early by screams. Our teeth chatter from crazy. I stand here with Misha Grunwald under one wet and torn blanket. We're sick, we're losing strength, and hope for survival. Just as an aside, Misha, well, they're both Mishas. Frank Grunwald never knew about Misha Krause's diary. He had no idea that he was being described in his last days. And it was only when they reunited, 70 years later, that he saw this testimony for the first time. About Half of the Birkenau boys did not survive. But Frank and Michael Krauss were among those who were liberated in May 1945 by American soldiers and taken to a hospital to recuperate. Frank, at that point, was 12 and a half years old, having lived in the ghetto, Auschwitz, Mauthausen concentration camps, and the Death March. Here's another German document from the 60 miles of documentation in the International Tracing Service, and you can see they have the year wrong of his birth, that's okay, of Mauthausen going to Mel, and eventually, right. What about his father, Kurt? After leaving Auschwitz, Frank's father was sent to Sachsenhausen and later to Ordrup, a Buchenwald subcamp. Some of you who visited the Holocaust Museum will recognize this photo. It's the first photo you see when you enter the exhibit. And here's Kurt's ITS card. After liberation, just before liberation, he hid in the woods for 2 weeks and then met up with the American Army. He worked with their medical team and then returned to Prague, where he eventually met 2 other child survivors, Birkenau boys, on the street. And we asked them, do you have any idea what happened to Frank? And they told him he's in a hospital recuperating. Immediately, Dr. Grunwald hired a car, drove to Mauthausen, and picked up his son. And it's amazing how within about 3 weeks of liberation, Frank already is recuperating. Youth can be a great friend. And he found the car, and he picked up Frank, and drove back to Prague. They began a new life together. But Dr. Grunwald never discussed the war, never discussed their other son, John, never discussed Vilma. It was too painful. The past was the past. And Frank soon realized his mother wasn't coming back, but he never knew the circumstances behind her death. The truth only revealed itself about a decade later. After his father died and Frank was going through his father's belongings, he found this note that his mother had written in Auschwitz, July 11, 1944, just minutes before she was gassed. This is a clip taken from the film Misha's View, where Frank discusses finding the letter.
There is a letter that was smuggled out from the family camp. It was written by my mother and given to a guard and given to my father. She basically knew what they were heading for. He got the letter the next day, or the day after they were killed. Here is the note. I never saw this letter. He did mention to me that he got a letter from my mother just before her death, but he never showed it to me. I never really asked him if I could see it. She was totally invulnerable and uncompromising when it came to her beliefs about treating people fairly, regardless who they were, or what economic level they were in, or what educational status. There was nothing about her that that would ever segregate people in any way. I recollect some plain, simple statements that she would make to me and to my brother about treating people the way you want to be treated. Always treat people with the utmost of respect. She treated us that way too. She was just a definition of a saint. So that's her part of the story.
And this is the letter that Frank found and later donated to the Holocaust Museum. It reads, "You, my one and only, my dear, In isolation, we waited the darkness. We visited Billy, who did not leave us with any doubt. We considered the possibility of hiding, but decided not to do it and felt it would be hopeless. Famous cars are already here and were waiting for it to begin. I applied bromides. They made me tired, but I'm not excited. I'm completely calm. You, my only and dearest one, do not blame yourself for what happened. It was our destiny. We did what we could. Stay healthy and remember my words. The time will heal. Not completely, then at least partially. Take care of the little Boulder boy and don't spoil it with too much in your love. Both of you stay healthy, my dear ones. And I'll be thinking of you and Misha. Have a fabulous life. We will sport the trucks into eternity. So, there's so many collections. Why did I decide to focus on this one? And the Grunwald story, what draws me to it? And Grunwald's altruism is in itself an act of resistance. She was healthy, she was young, she could have survived, but she didn't want her older son to go through the ordeal alone. And one of the Oregon's propaganda aids of the Nazis was to turn the Jewish community into their own twisted propaganda. They wanted to turn Jews into these demons that they imagined. And you see a letter like Vilma's, you realize if that's one thing that they failed. And despite everything that she went through, she never lost her kindness, for humanity, her love for her son. And I want to end the post-war. Vilma's letter shows us what one Jewish woman, knowing that she was about to be gassed, what was going through her head. Michael Krause's diary that was composed during the war, written down immediately after liberation, giving us a window into what one young adolescent was thinking as he was going through this ordeal. But what about her? What about the father, who was so broken by the experience that he couldn't even discuss it with his own son? What was he feeling upon? Well, in February 2013, during the museum's 20th anniversary commemorations, they hosted a tribute to liberators and survivors in Los Angeles. And there I met the daughter of a liberator, of course, Ruth. Her father, Albert Levinson, was the son of Jewish immigrants. And he felt there would like the grace of God go on. If his parents had he would have been on the other side. And he was working as a clerk. He had a typewriter. And he took down the testimony of one survivor who spoke English. He was also totally devastated by his experiences, what solid wardrobe looked like, and never discussed it with his children. He said, yes, I liberated the concentration camp, period, nothing else. But after his passing, his daughter discovered a document among his possessions. And there was a testimony that he had written down by, and you can see it for yourself, certain Frank Grunwald, Czechoslovak physician. My daughter, whose testimony do I have? And through Misha's view, she's Googling several years, she realizes that she has the testimony, Frank Grunwald, the father of Misha, the husband of Vilma. And she too donated this. And this incredible document shows things that were unknown to Frank. He didn't know about Michael Krause's diary. He certainly never knew that his father had given testimony, and this testimony was before the father knew that Frank had survived. He did it the day he was liberated, or he knew that he would reunite with his son. And what did he say? On December 15th, 1943, I was sent with my family into the greatest camp of extermination. For 6 months, I worked there as a physician in the same camp where my wife and boys lived. On March 6, 1944, 3,800 people were taken. For the most part, these were healthy people, including 600 children, gassed to birth during the night. During May and June, I saw the daily arrival of 1,000 to 2,000 Hungarian Carpatho-Ruthenian Jewish families, of whom at least 80% were gassed and buried. Day and night, 4 crematoriums were blaring. They didn't suffice. The corpses had to be burned in large holes nearby. The rumble and stink of burnt flesh and bones went sprayed out into our barracks. I've been told that occasionally women and children have been thrown alive into the flames. I didn't see such things, but I heard during several nights loud crying, children, cries which meant Emily's death. I heard the barking of dogs, rifle, machine gun fire. During the first months of 1944, I assisted 14 women in childbirth. There were born 13 healthy children. On July 10th and 11th, all the women with their children were gassed to the birds. Among them, also my young and healthy wife, Dilma, my son, John. My son, Misha, who was a good-looking fellow with fair hair and blue eyes, the Germans like, had been spared and taken to another camp. After the catastrophe, I worked as a physician in the hospital, joining 4 crematoriums. I was present at a great number of selections where thousands were selected to be gassed and burned. My little boy came to see me over a week. October 26, 1944, happened what I feared most. I was separated from my boy. I was sent with the transport of laborers to Ordrup, and my boy stayed in Birkenau. Members of the SS told me there wasn't any danger for my son, but I know the value of Nazi promises, and I only hope that my boy was liberated when the Russians entered Auschwitz for Auschwitz in January. So, Dilma's unique letter, Kurt's oral testimony, are testimony to the bonds of a husband and wife and their love to their children. And together they provide unique, authentic documentation to the spirit and humanity of the Jewish community, even under the worst possible circumstances. And by preserving these 2 documents, the Holocaust Museum memorializes in memory of those who perished, documents the experiences of those who survived, adds new depths of our understanding of the Holocaust, and even in some cases, makes available previously unknown information to the survivors themselves about their own personal history. Thank you very much.